You can draw this in Procreate. Welcome to another You Can Draw This video tutorial, in which we only use the brushes that are already in Procreate. This time I will guide you through all the steps to create this planet Earth. During this tutorial you will be learning by doing. You will learn different techniques which you can also use for your own creative projects in Procreate. And don't worry, I'm sure that if you watch this video till the end, that you are able to create this planet Earth as well. Because I have already seen so many amazing results on Instagram from the previous You Can Draw This videos. First, let me tell you the canvas size. It's 3000 by 2000 pixels. And I have created a color palette which you can download through a link in the description, in case you want to use the exact same colors I'm using during this video. First thing we'll be doing is filling our canvas with a color. Let's pick this dark blue color in our color palette and drag this circle onto the canvas to fill it. Next thing we'll do is add our planet. Let's create a new layer for that, so we'll click the plus in the menu, in the layer menu. And now we'll go to the monoline brush, which you can find under calligraphy. And for our color, we'll pick this bright, saturated blue color. And now draw a simple circle. Just hold your pen in place to let it snap to a, well, not right now it's an oval, but if you hold one finger on your screen, it'll snap to a perfect circle. Like that. And now you can fill it by dragging in the color. And you can use the arrow tool here, the move tool. And while you have it set to uniform, you can resize your Earth until it is the size that you like. I'll go for something like this, maybe a little bit smaller. There, and place it in the middle. And just click the arrow again to leave that menu. Right now we just have a blue circle, a big blue dot on a dark background. Let's fix that. Let's go back to that background, layer 1, and let's add a little bit of light there. We'll use the soft brush, which you can find under airbrushing for that. And let's pick this lighter blue color. Now the opacity of this brush is set to 40%. That means it's a bit transparent. And let's make our brush, well, let's go for 17%. And let's add a little bit of light behind our Earth, which you can barely see probably. So let me switch to a lighter blue. Let's go for this bright blue and add a little bit of that as well. I bet you can see this. Just add a little bit of glow behind our Earth. And you can slowly build it up since you have that low opacity. So it's a little bit transparent. And if you feel like your transition is a bit too hard, or a bit too harsh, then you can go to the magic wand and use the Gaussian blur. Now if you slide to the right on your screen, you can blur this layer. And you can go for around 8%, for example, to slightly blur that layer. Now let's move back to Earth. Let's go to layer 2. First thing I want to do for our Earth is give it a slight blur as well, just so that we have a little bit of a blurry edge. So we'll go to the magic wand again and use Gaussian blur. Just slide to the right and we'll go for 3%. And now it's time to add some continents to our Earth. Let's go to the layer menu and click the plus to create a new layer. And we will clip this layer to our Earth. Click the layer and then select clipping mask. And now whatever we paint on layer 3 will only show up on layer 2, our earth. You won't be able to paint outside of that circle. And to draw our consonants, we'll go to the calligraphy brushes and we'll pick the chalk. And let me pick this third color in the color palette, that green, to start creating our consonants. Now you don't have to be super precise about this because we will also be covering our consonants with clouds, but I'm going to create a shape that resembles North America and South America. Let me tell you my brush size. I have it set to 100% opacity, and let's set the size to 8%. And we'll start at the top and we'll make a curve down. That's the west coast. And then we'll make a shape here. We'll cover that with clouds later. And you can just adjust the shape a little bit, going over that edge. Add a little thingy there. And then we'll go to the south. Let's start about here. Make a semicircle and then go down, curve to the left. And let's go from here, go to this side. Let's do something like that. And you can just adjust the edges a little bit, add some parts to the land. You can look at some maps. If you're a real perfectionist, you can look at maps and try to recreate, well, the real continents. And now you can fill these layers by dragging in the color. And since this brush, it can leave some gaps, you might have to adjust your fill threshold. If you fill the color, hold, and then move from left to right, you can adjust the fill threshold. So make sure that it just fills the shape and not your entire canvas. And let's fill this shape as well. And you can just refine the edges a little bit. Maybe add some islands. You can add Florida if you like. But we'll also be covering this with some clouds, and parts will be in shadow. Now I would like to add some texture to our continents, but I don't want that texture to end up on our oceans. So what we can do is add alpha lock. Use alpha lock on this layer. This locks the pixels, locks the colors that are already there. That way we can only paint on the paint that's already there. So that those are those continents, and we can't paint on anything that's empty on this layer. So let's go to a texture brush. Let's go to textures and use Kurawang. And let's pick this darker green color to add a layer of texture to our earth, to our continents. I had the brush at 4%, but we can go a bit bigger. Let's say 10%. Add some texture to South America as well. And let's also add some sandy colors. Let's start with this dark one. And I'll make the brush a bit smaller again. Let's go for 5%. And let's go over the west coast of North America. And also the west coast of South America. And you can slowly build up the texture and go towards the lighter color. So let's go to this one right now. And make it a bit lighter. And let's also use the lightest color here. You can make the brush even smaller. You can play around with that a bit. I'm at 2% right now. And just lighten it up a bit. That looks nice. Next, let's add some clouds to our earth. We'll do that on a new layer. So click the plus and use clipping mask again. That way our clouds will stick to our earth. We'll go to the organic brushes and use the cotton brush. And for the color, let's pick this very light color here. And now let's create some cloudy shapes. Let's just play around with the brush size. I'll put it at 5% right now, but I'll play around with the size. Going smaller and bigger. We want some big clouds, but also some wispy, smaller shapes. And you can just look at these photos from NASA, some satellite photos from Earth, to get an idea of how these clouds, what they look like. So I'm going a bit random here. Just let some of these clouds cover our Earth. Perhaps some here. But it's a great idea to take a look at some reference images. Let me make the brush a bit smaller. I'll go for 2%. Let's make something like, perhaps it's a hurricane over here. I'm sorry everyone who's living there. Luckily it's not a real hurricane. Let's just make some wispy shapes. And the techniques that you're learning here during this video tutorial, you can use these, like I said at the beginning, you can use these for your own creative projects. Like using alpha lock and clipping mask, those are really handy tools when painting in Procreate. And if you're new to Procreate and you just want to learn about the basics, about all the tools in Procreate, then you might like my Skillshare class. It's all about getting started with Procreate, and in the end we also make a realistic looking apple. Real painting project. Plus you also get some brushes, some of my custom brushes there. So I'll just leave a link in the description for you if you are interested. And if you want even more, if you want to join the biggest Procreate community at Patreon, well, then you might like my Patreon page. There I share a lot more fully narrated, long Procreate video tutorials. So if you want to really take a deep dive into Procreate, then that's the place for you. Now we got some nice clouds here. Now I would like to use the liquify tool on our clouds. Let's go to the magic wand, go to liquify, and set it to twirl right. I have it set to, let's set it to 45% if I manage. Yes, 46 is also fine. And let's place our pen on the clouds. And then you get this nice swirl, and you can place it at different locations to make make those clouds move. Let's go a bit smaller, perhaps 30%. And go to that center of our, I guess it's a hurricane. You can create these nice swirls in the clouds. And then you can just go back to your brush and you can add a little bit more clouds, varying your brush size, adding little dabs. To create some nice variation in your clouds. I think we have enough clouds now. Next, I would like to add a shadow part and a light part to our earth. We'll do that by making a selection of our earth. You can go to the layer, click it, and then go for select. Now we have a selection of our earth, but we want to invert it. Click invert in this menu. And I will create a new layer on top of the others. And you can fill it with this very dark color over here. Just drag it in. And now we have our shadow. Let's release the selection. We have our shadow, but we only want our shadow to show up on our earth. So what do? We use a layer clipping mask. And now we can go to the move tool. That's this arrow. And you can move the shadow. Move it a bit to the left and down to create a shadow on our earth. Like that. Maybe a bit further. There. And click the arrow again to get out of that menu. Next, let's use Gaussian blur to blur this shadow a bit. So we'll go to the magic wand, click Gaussian blur, and slide to the right. I think a blur of around 12% is nice. And let's repeat the process for the light side of the earth. We'll make the selection again, click the layer, click select, and invert this selection. I will make a new layer again on top of all the others. And we will fill this one with, well, let's pick this very light blue. And again, we only want that light to show up on our earth, so we'll use layer clipping mask again. Click the layer and click clipping mask. Release the selection, and let's move around this light side. And we'll do that in the opposite direction, so we'll go to the right and up a little bit. Like that. And again, we will use the Gaussian blur to blur this layer a bit. We can go for around 10%. I feel like it's a little bit too light, so we'll go back to that move tool. Let's move it back just a little bit. And right now, you see that there's a little bit of light on our dark side of the earth. I want to get rid of that. And we can do that by adding a mask to this layer. Or you could use an eraser, but that's permanent. If you use a mask, you can always revert back. So click mask. And now a mask layer, a layer mask, is attached to this layer. Whatever is white on this layer mask will be, well, I guess it's transparent. You will see everything on the layer underneath. But as soon as you start painting with black, you will be masking parts of that layer it is attached to. So let's go to airbrushing and use the soft brush and have it set to black. Now when we paint over with black, we will mask parts of that light layer. So we want to get rid of that little light edge in the dark part of our earth. I feel like this shadow and this light, that's a bit too harsh. I want to make a more gradual transition. So I want to add 2 more layers. I'll add a layer underneath our dark shadow. So go to the layer with the clouds and click plus. And let's set this layer to multiply. The layer blending mode, multiply. What this does, it makes everything darker on the layer underneath. So if we use the soft brush and use that dark color, we can darken a part of the earth. The opacity of the brush is still set to 40% and the size is at 17%. And let's just glaze over this area of the earth to darken it up just a little bit more. And we'll do the same thing for the light part of the earth. Let's make a layer on top of our shadow layer. And we'll set the layer blending mode from this layer to screen. So just click the N and scroll to screen. And instead of darkening everything underneath, this layer will lighten everything underneath. So let's pick this light blue color over here. And again, let's just glaze over the earth and lighten this area up. And if you feel like this is a bit too much light, you can control it by clicking the S and lowering the opacity to, for instance, 70%. You're doing great, we're really getting somewhere. Let's work on our background right now. Let's go back to layer 1. Right now I would like to use the nebula brush, which you can find under luminance. Right here is the nebula brush. I have tweaked this brush a bit, so let's click it. And let's go to rendering. I have set the blend mode of this brush to normal. That way you can paint with whatever color you want. It won't brighten everything. Otherwise, I believe it was set to screen or color dodge, something like that. It would lighten everything up, but now it's set to normal, so we can use whatever color we want. So let's add some spectacular nebula clouds. Let me pick this blue, this third color. Third color in the color palette. And let's add some nebula clouds. Oh, and let me check. The size is set to 8% and the opacity is set to 70%. And now let's add some nebula clouds surrounding our Earth. By the way, sometimes people ask me what type of screen protector I use. And I don't use any. I have never used a screen protector. I'm just drawing on the glass. And no, I don't have any scratches on it. Okay, you can also switch to that dark color, that second color, and also go over with that color a bit to vary the color of that nebula. And you can also switch to the darkest color for the outside. We want that light to be near the Earth and we want it to be darker when you move away to the outside of your canvas. Next, let's add some stars. We'll do that on a separate layer. Let's click the plus and let's go to the glimmer brush. I have also tweaked this brush a bit. I have set the spacing to max and the jitter to max. And when you go to shape, I have also set the scatter to max. Now let's make this brush very small. Let's go for 5%. And let's use this very bright blue color. And now just go over the sky, or well, over the universe, and let's fill it with stars. You can make diagonal strokes or horizontal. Just fill that entire space with stars. And if you push harder, you will get bigger stars. And if you use less pressure, you will get smaller stars. And you can also just play around with the size of your brush. We can go bigger, let's say 13%. Make even bigger stars. That will also create some depth. Oh, and in case you're wondering, let me show you my pressure curve. You can go to the wrench and then to prefs and then to edit pressure curve. And you can adjust your pressure curve for your pen there. And this is the way I have set it. Now back to our stars. Let's duplicate this layer with stars. You can just swipe to the left on your layer and click duplicate. Now let's turn this one off by clicking that little check. And let's lower the opacity of this one. We'll click the N and move the slider to, let's say, 40% or 38, well, whatever. Let's turn back on the other layer and let's flip this one. We can do that by going to the arrow and then click flip horizontal. Now we have a flipped version. Now, if you feel like, whoa, this is just way too many stars, you can control that with a layer mask. Let's do that. Let's click this layer with stars and use mask. And now we can fill this layer with black so everything is gone. And now you can paint back in some stars by using white. Let's double click here in our circle to grab 100% white. And let's go to the soft brush under airbrushing. And now you can use white to paint back in some stars. So let's just go over. We can turn up the opacity a bit. Let's go to 75%. And let's just paint back in some stars. And once you feel like you've painted back in too many stars, you can just switch back to black and, well, remove stars again. This gives you full control over your stars. Alright, almost there. Let's add a beautiful flare, a sun flare to our earth. We'll go all the way to the top of our layers and click the plus to make a new layer. And this time, well, we'll go to luminance, the luminance brushes again, and use the flare brush. We'll keep our color at that bright blue. And the brush size is set to 30%. And the opacity is at 100%. And now let's add a flare to this side of our earth. Well, it's not exactly in the right place, so we can use the arrow to move it. Let's place it here. Click the arrow again. And now we are going to duplicate this layer. You can do that by swiping down with 3 fingers and then use copy and paste. But in case you can't use any gestures with your hand, you could also just go to your layer palette and duplicate the layer. Now let's rotate this one like this. And then click the arrow again. And we'll do this one more time. Swipe down with 3 fingers and use copy and paste. And we'll turn around this one as well. You know, we could also use switch horizontal to vary it a bit. Like that. And now I want to adjust our flare a bit by using layer masks again. So let's click this layer, use mask. And use the soft brush again under airbrushing. We'll switch to pure black by double tapping at the bottom here. And I'll lower the opacity again to 40%. And let's just remove some of these, well, these lines, these sparks. And let's do the same for this layer right here. Use a mask, click mask, and use black to remove a little bit. Now we'll go back to the bottom. We'll go above our stars. Click plus to make a new layer, and let's set this layer to color dodge. So click the N and scroll to color dodge. And while we still have our soft brush, we'll set it to this blue. And now let's add some more glow to this side of our earth. You can also go a little bit around it, add a little bit more glow there as well. And let's make our brush a bit smaller. Let's say 8%. And let's make a horizontal line of light there. Well, maybe a bit less, like that. That's a pretty looking glow. And you can soften it a bit by going to the magic wand and using Gaussian blur. You can slide it a bit, for instance to 3.8%. And you could even lower the opacity of this layer and make another color dodge layer to slowly build up this effect if you need more control. I just want to add a final touch. I want to add some more bright stars. So let's make a new layer on top of this glow and go to the luminance brushes and use the light pen. We'll set the color to this bright blue. And the brush size is set to 50%. And the opacity is at 100%. And let's add some really bright stars. You can just pick some random spots. And if you press harder, you will get a bigger star. And you can also give it that little glow, sparkly effect by making a new layer underneath it. So go to that glow layer, click plus, and using that flare brush, you can add a little bit of flare to those stars. You can zoom in a bit. Let's make the brush a bit smaller, perhaps 15%. Let's see. Well, that's a bit too big, so we have to go smaller, maybe 8. You'll just have to play around with this a bit. And you can place these behind these stars. And just play around with the size of the brush. I'm at 5% right now. And you can just add these flares behind these stars. And of course, with this layer, you could also use a layer mask if you want more control and remove some parts of these flares. And that's it! You have created a wonderful, beautiful planet Earth. I hope you had fun following this tutorial and that you learned something about the tools in Procreate. Don't forget, be sure to share your work on Instagram and tag me in the image, not just in the description. That way I will be able to find your work and perhaps you'll see your work in the next You Can Draw This video. If you want more, be sure to check out my other You Can Draw This videos or just get started with these 2 videos over here.